Welcome, everybody. My name is Jeff Javier, and I'm with the University of Arizona Sonoran Center for Excellence in Disabilities. We are here for session 4, and I'm just going to go over a few community guidelines before we get started. Number 1, please assume good faith from your colleagues. We are all here to learn together. 2, please use the chat or raise hand function if you wish to share. Participants are not permitted to unmute themselves. To share verbally, you will be called on after virtually raising your hand. Number 3, please recognize and respect others' feelings, background, and cultural differences. 4, not all questions will be answered during today's session. 5, please be judicious and efficient with shared information and experiences. If you are speaking, try to limit yourself to 30 seconds or less. It can be just as courageous to listen as it is to share. So please do your best to understand when it is best to step back instead of stepping up. Number 6, if you are speaking, please speak slowly as we have an English captioner working diligently in the background. And it's also for our ASL interpreters to capture everything that's being spoken. This is true for our meeting presenters as well as our participants. If anyone's joining by phone, you can raise your hand by hitting *9, and then you can unmute or mute using *6. And I'll now hand it off to Natalie Luna Rose.
Okay, and thank you everybody for joining us for our 4th session on our 2nd day of the African American Conference on Disabilities. This is our 11th annual conference and our 2nd virtually, so we really appreciate you joining us this afternoon. So just a few things before I introduce our speakers. I already see it going on in the chat, but if this is your first time here and if you can let us know where you're from, we'd greatly appreciate it. We've had people already join the conference from Nairobi, Egypt, New Zealand, Germany, Canada, Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands. So this has now become an international conference. So we're so excited for that. And again, thank you. And thank you if you let friends and other colleagues know about the conference, we really appreciate that. Thank you so much. So I'm going to also thank our sponsors, because without their support, we could not pull this off. So thank you to our gold sponsor, Perkins Coie, our silver sponsors, Arizona Department of Health Services, Children and Youth with Special Healthcare Needs, and Valley Toyota Dealers, our bronze sponsor, Ability 360, and our advocate sponsors, Arizona Statewide Independent Living Council, Arizona State University, Arizona Developmental Disabilities Planning Council, Arizona Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, Arizona Community Foundation, Banner University Health Plans, Diverse Ability Incorporated, Lexus Superstition Springs, National Disability Rights Network, Marks the Spot Barbershop, NAACP Maricopa County Branch, Raising Special Kids, Unique's Multicultural Connections, and our co-host for the conference, Arizona Center for African American Resources, the University of Arizona Sonoran Center for Excellence in Disabilities, Northern Arizona University Institute for Human Development, and my colleagues here at the Arizona Center for Disability Law. Thank you so much for your support. As a reminder, also we will be offering certificates of attendance for those who need them, but you will have to take the survey that we will be offering at the end of today's session. So please stay through for the whole session to fill out the survey and get your certificate of attendance. Now, without further ado, I am going to introduce our speakers for today's session. Being unapologetically Black, healing from trauma, today we will be hearing from Dr. Carlian Dawson, Director of Education at the Arizona Center for African American Children, and Dr. DaMond Holt at the Trauma Center of Hope, and he will be our first speaker. So Dr. Holt, please take it away.
Before we get started, Dr. Holt, we have a We just want to say thank you for a second to AACD for allowing us to be on here and presenting to you today. And also, I want to say thank you to someone who is very special to me, because she is the one who introduced Dr. Holt and I, Reverend Dr. Flo Wilhite. I see her name here, but I just want to give a shout out because I am so appreciative of what she did and how she got us connected, because we have an announcement to make. Dr. Holt, you want to make the announcement since I started talking first?
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, we want to make an amazing announcement that myself and Dr. Dawson are co-authoring a new book that's coming out. So you want to most definitely keep your ears open for this book that's going to be rolling out. It's going to be entitled Black Trauma. And so it's going to be unapologetically Black, talking about the traumatic experience of Black Americans, African refugees, African Americans, and our ancestors are going all the way back to the 1600s with chattel slavery, to all the way up to today, what we're dealing with our traumatic and most definitely generational traumatic experiences. So it's coming out. We're getting the book together. We're writing our chapters, and we're excited, and we're going to help people heal.
Thank you.
All right. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Let me get my my presentation up, get it ready and to rock and roll. Hope everybody can see this.
We can see it.
Yes.
You can see it? Okay. All right. And you say I need to take out my video? I know. Or can you see it?
If you could take your video off, that'd be great. Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, my name is, as we spoke before, my name is Dr. DaMond Holt, and I am a certified traumatologist, a trauma crisis specialist, and a mental health specialist. So in a nutshell, I am a trauma, mental health, and behavior expert. And so I pretty much look at how trauma impacts the entire person, not just mentally, emotional, but the entire person. And so we're going to have a good time going through our trainings. And so pretty much a lot of people know my work in regards to early childhood trauma. I work with some of the most challenging schools. In particular, I work with a lot of kids of color and poor children. I work with a lot of kids who are not performing well academically and having some severe dysregulation, not being able to manage their moods. And so as a result, it turns into behavior issues. So this is the picture of some kids I worked with a few years ago. That was kind of what we would consider written off because of the fact that they were having some severe behavior issues. But when you understand trauma and you help kids or you help individuals address their traumas and help them heal, there's no secret what type of positive outcomes that you can get. And so today we're going to be talking about 3 major points today, and that's hurt, that's heal, and that's hope. And so I'll be talking a lot about today about what trauma does to the whole person, but more importantly, how do we heal from it? So let's talk about the hurting. Frederick Douglass said, "It is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men," which is very, very true. And a lot of times in my work, I find my work in alignment with this powerful statement. The quicker that we can address early childhood trauma and psychological and psychiatric issues at earlier stages, especially during key times of brain development, the better and the healthier individuals' outcomes would be. And so one of the things I always say, that trauma may not be your fault, but it is certainly your responsibility to heal from it, okay? And so trauma may be your history, but it does not have to determine your destiny. So bad things have happened to many of us in our past, all the way up to early ages, but that doesn't necessarily have to determine your destiny. There is something called grit and resilience and perseverance where with the right relationships and resources, you can rebound from your traumatic experiences. So again, as I stated before, trauma may not be your fault, but it's all of our responsibility to heal from our trauma. If we don't heal from our trauma, we will end up bleeding on people that didn't cut us, because hurting people hurt people. So let's look at what is psychological trauma. Psychological trauma is pretty much uh, it's a wound or a scar that happens when life devastating things happens to us, or life-threatening things happens to us. And pretty much, in a nutshell, it's a wound that is caused by fear, threats, or harm that can impact us physically, mentally, emotionally, or sexually. So in a nutshell, I define trauma as two things. Number one, trauma is an emotional and psychological wound or scar to the brain when life-devastating or life-threatening things happens to us. Number two, trauma, the second part of the definition, I would say trauma is also a overwhelming stress that triggers people to get dysregulated, and it is so stressful and so overwhelming that people have a difficult time coping with it. So trauma is two things. It's this overwhelming, dysregulating type of stress, and it is also a rewiring of the brain due to the fact of the brain being injured or the brain being scarred or wounded because of life devastating or life threatening things. And so when I talk about trauma, trauma again, as I alluded to before, ladies and gentlemen, it impacts the whole person. It impacts your neurology, it impacts your psychology, it impacts your physiology, and it impacts your theology. Neurology is the brain, psychology is your mind, physiology is your body, and theology is your soul. So I know a lot of people say, what theology? How does that impact? So let me explain. So, and I call this the NPPT spectrum, and that will also be in our book, the Black Trauma book. What we'll talk about is trauma impacts the brain. So we know that it impacts the amygdala and the hippocampus and your thalamus and your hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal axis, and your frontal lobe, where your prefrontal cortex is. All of that is the neurological piece of how trauma impacts those regions of the brain. But we also know that trauma impacts the psychology, which is the mind, which is the mental and the emotional and the psychosocial piece of us. But it also impacts our physiology. It affects physically our bodies, which means that trauma can be so intrusive that you can have physical issues, far as it impacts and compromises your immune systems. Immune systems is very important, because if your immune system is compromised, then it is going to impact how you recover and heal from infections. It also impacts your digestive system. Many people who have a lot of chronic stress and trauma also have stomach problems, a lot of the bloating and a lot of the gas and a lot of the constipation, things of that nature, that a lot of times we don't really talk about root causes, because we do a lot of over-the-counter and we do a lot of medications to address symptoms, but not dealing with the cause. And what we find is when people are going through a lot of trauma and they're going through a lot of chronic stress, there is an attack or an interruption in some sort of your digestive system. And also insomnia, which means that people don't sleep well because it impacts your circadian rhythm, where it gives you difficult times to sleep. Then your theology, trauma impacts your theology, which is your soul, which is your spiritual. So trauma just doesn't impact the mental and the emotional and the social, but also impacts the spiritual. And what I mean by that is sometimes, depending on whatever your religious affiliation or faith persuasion is, whether you're Christian, Jewish, or Muslim, or Buddhist, or things of that nature. But what happens is when people have been really traumatized and it hits down to the core of the soul, it does impact people's faith in a higher power or God. They want to know, where was God when these things has happened to me. So this is how I explain the NPPT spectrum, which is the whole person, the mind, body, and soul, the neurology, psychology, physiology, and the theological. When we look at trauma, we must consider the 3 E's. The 3 E's is experience, exposure, and the event. All these things are very important, ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to addressing trauma. Trauma is an experience because you have to experience it. Trauma is exposure, which means that everything that you've been traumatized, you're not traumatized because you directly experienced it. Sometimes we're traumatized because indirectly we were exposed to it. For example, constantly hearing about the atrocities of slavery and how our ancestors were treated, constantly hearing about how police racial profile Black Americans and people of color. It does make you feel like you're in this fight or flight experience, like you're in high alert, you're not safe. And then most definitely, trauma is an event in itself. So let's look at the beginning, going back to the 17 and 1800s, addressing trauma. We saw that in the 1800s, it wasn't necessarily called trauma, but this is how we began to get the science of what we have in regards to what we call trauma today, is that in the 1800s and the 1700s, doctors and practitioners were seeing veterans coming back from war on the battlefield having some similar symptoms, like feeling sad or depressed or having insomnia, can't sleep, having nightmares, anxiety, and things of that nature. And so as we progressed with the science, we began to see that there began to be a progression of these diagnoses. In the U.S. Civil War, trauma was called the Civil Heart syndrome, World War I shell shock, World War II combat neurosis, you name it. And then when we look at the DSM, by which that's the book where practitioners diagnose and treat, version 2, trauma was historical neurosis. Then the 3rd edition, and then we got PTSD, 94 PTSD and associated features, and DSM-5, the spectrum, the trauma spectrum. And so one thing about trauma is it began to overhaul how we look at everything we did in regards to medicine, in regards to behavioral health or mental health. And what we realize is that if the brain is wounded and the brain has these scars because of traumatic experiences, it has that impact on the whole person. And so ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences, coming from the 90s with 17,000 participants had been surveyed, and they asked these different questions that was pretty much on this list, asked 10 different questions, whether it's from mental health, substance abuse, emotional neglect, sexual abuse, psychological abuse, loss of a parent, criminal behavior. And what we began to see was the outcomes was staggering. It was alarming to see that people who were experiencing a lot of the childhood traumas, how it impacted the whole person. Looking at this ACE triangle from the bottom up, we see that historical trauma it goes into social conditions and childhood experiences and disrupted neurodevelopment, which is key, guys. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. But trauma most definitely impacts brain development and brain growth and how healthy the brain can be, and being in brain cells and all these things that are necessary for great outcomes for individuals. Begins to be impacted. Social, emotional, cognitive behavior, you name it, all the way up to where we see disease and disabilities, which we're talking about today with the Conference with Disabilities. But we also saw that 10 years are taken from a person's life when they have a lot of trauma that is unaddressed. It takes years off of their life and they live shorter than what they should. And so we see that individuals, according to ACEs, that have 4 more ACEs, that means that if you did that 10-point questionnaire and you answered 4 or more of those ACEs or more, you are 4 times likely to be an alcoholic, 4 times more to have a sexually transmitted disease, 4 times more to inject drugs, 3 times more to antidepressants, all of those different things, okay? So the outcomes are alarming. And so we see that these indicators opens the door for a lot of the maladaptive regression in regards to life. And so when we see people in behaviors, we usually only see the 10%. That's, if you look at the iceberg, we see 10%. We see behaviors as are really only 10%. It looks like that's everything, but really it's not. What you have to do is look deeper under the water to see the entire iceberg. And you see that 9%, those behaviors is not the cause. Those behaviors is a manifestation of something deeper, which have drivers. So again, when we look at the top of the iceberg, we see behaviors. You look at the bottom, we see that there's physiological injuries, neurological injuries, emotional, social drivers that's creating or pushing that person to behave in the way that they behave. And then when we look at early childhood trauma's effects, we see it impacts brain structure, learning, cognitive development, social emotional development, behavior, physical health, I mean, you name it. Being able to build attachments, which has a lot to do with healthy relationships. So individuals who have been traumatized at early ages have a hard time attaching, which makes them very dissociative, and sometimes having dissociative disorder, where they're just totally cut off, they're totally numb, they're totally far removed and disengaged and detached. And so those are some of the things that those type of things happens to individuals. One of the things I want to talk about is also burnout. So in schools, we are also seeing next level of trauma called secondary trauma, where our teachers are being burnt out, our counselors, our social workers. This is not just in our school systems. We're seeing our police officers being worn out. We're seeing our counselors being worn out because of secondary trauma. Staff burnout, compassion fatigue, just being worn down because of constantly dealing with other people's trauma. And so trauma now is a school community issue. It's a community that addresses the traumas of students, the traumas of staff, the traumas of families. How do we help empower families that have issues with their traumas? So I want you to be thinking about trauma-informed care at a whole nother level that totally involves how do we address the traumas of what people, normal people are going through, and also what the staff are going through, what the professionals in the rooms are feeling when they have been going through a lot of the different traumas. So trauma looks like abuse, verbal, emotional, physical, sexual. It can be neglect. Poverty most definitely is a serious issue in regards to trauma, and poverty is something that we really need to be looking at as a traumatic experience, because trauma opens the door for other complex situations like homelessness and hunger and starvation, not having enough food. Mass incarceration, which also creates separations of families, which means that now children are probably raised by a single parent household, or sometimes the mother and father have been incarcerated, and now either a family member comes and take on the responsibility of taking care of children, or they can get caught up in the system with a CPS case. Domestic violence, community violence, all these things has a direct impact on the brain of individuals. And what happens when people go to prison? Are they the same when they come out? And I've come to tell you today that sometimes people are traumatized in prison. And so prison do have an impact on the brain. And some people, after being incarcerated, when they are released from prison, they come home with a lot of the symptoms that's consistent with post-traumatic stress disorder. Grief and loss is huge right now, especially with COVID and COVID-related trauma. So many people have either been infected and were sick, and we had a lot of people in our families and a lot of people in our communities, a lot of people in our churches, a lot of people we work with that have died as a result of COVID. One thing I want you to think about as well is that trauma just doesn't impact the brain, the mind, the body, but it also impacts your genes, your genetics. And what we have seen is that gene expression has been altered when there's a lot of trauma. A lot of people don't know that as well, that pregnant mothers have to be careful in regards to their traumas and their chronic stress because it impacts them and it impacts their unborn child. Epigenetics suggests that generational trauma is real. And we've seen a direct link from what great grandmama went through, the grandmother goes through, and what grandmother goes through, the mother goes through, and what the mother goes through, the daughter goes through, and what the daughter goes through, the granddaughter goes through. And our genes are constantly being impacted by each generation. And as I alluded to before, pregnant mothers have to be careful about living in traumatic experiences because it does impact them, but it also impacts their unborn child. What we've seen is that in the womb of the pregnant mother and the placenta is disrupted because of traumatic experience, and that cortisol, which is stress hormone, is released into the placenta. And when babies are born, infants coming to the world, and the mother gives birth, sometimes infants are already traumatized because of the traumatic stress that the pregnant mother went through, which create hypersensitive infants. So we know that false care is an issue. Bullying is an issue, especially with individuals with disabilities and special needs individuals. They used to say sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And I'm telling you today, that is a lie, ladies and gentlemen. Bullying is real. And we used to say shake hands, apologize, and move on, but bullying is even much more than that. Bullying is impacting your mental health. We know that 160,000 students in America have anxiety to go to school because of bullying. We know that cyberbullying is a new phase of bullying where you can intimidate and harass individuals through social media, through TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, text messaging. This stuff is real, ladies and gentlemen. So we must also consider how traumatizing bullying can be. Racial trauma. We are in a racial tension throughout our country, through our communities, due to politics, due to police brutality and racial bias in the judicial system and racial bias in the education system. We have to talk about these things, how racism impacts the brain. Just think about the thoughts of how we've heard just stories of slavery. We heard the stories of lynching and Jim Crows and murders and disappearances and burning crosses in front of our Black churches and in our homes, and how we have been attacked. And I mean, you name it. Black trauma is real. Structural racism, institutional racism, systemic racism, internalized racism, individualized racism, and interpersonal racism. These all things have a hard impact on the brain of African Americans and people of color. And it makes our communities hypersensitive. It makes our communities hypervigilant because we don't feel safe. And it's hard to trust when we always have to address our Black specific traumas. And so just a little bit of you seeing, these are the different things that trauma impacts: the physical, the relationships, the mental health, brain development. And so we know through COVID has had its impact. And when we look at the brain, we see that when individuals have been going through a lot of traumatic experiences. Remember, I talked about ACEs. If you look at to the right, the brain image on the right, we see underdeveloped development of the brain, which will eventually create disorders or opens the door for delays, motor delays, social delays, all of those different things because of the fact that the brain is underdeveloped versus the one on the left, which is a healthy brain that's probably in loving spaces and getting the love and the kindness and the support and the stimulation that it needs in order for this brain to be healthy. So when we talk about trauma, there is that neurobiological response to where when you feel that you are in a threat and you feel like you are in some maladaptive conditions, it does impact the thalamus. It does impact your amygdala. It does impact your hippocampus. It does impact your prefrontal cortex. All those things are important when we talk about being in a flight or flight. It impacts memory, your somatic, your episodic, your procedural, and your emotional memory. This is what happens when trauma may have happened years ago, but yet you're still triggered by it. Well, how am I still triggered by it? Because of memory. And your memory comes from your hippocampus, which is your memory headquarters. And when you are reliving situations that has happened to you, you can be triggered through memory. Even though it happened years ago, it still feels like in real time that is happening today. So let's talk about the healing. Healing is relationships, resources, and having resilience. One of the big things we understand to help people heal from trauma, it starts out with relationships. In other words, it starts out with love. Healing happens through relationships. Well, how does healing happen in relationships? Well, it starts out according to Bruce Perry. He said the more healthy relationships a child has, the more likely he will be to recover from trauma and thrive. Relationships are the agents of change, and the most powerful therapy is love. I heard the songwriter say, what the world needs now is love, sweet love. Tina Turner say, what's love got to do with it? Well, I can tell you that it has a whole lot to do with it. Love is more powerful than any psychotropic meds, any antidepressants, any psychotic medication. Love is the key. To get people to start healing from trauma, we have to reverse the rewiring of the limbic system of the brain that keeps a person in survival mode and get them back to connection mode. We were born with connection, but trauma rewires the brain to protection. So we have to rewire the brain again from protection back to connection. We have to have trust in order to have relationships. Another thing to create healing is to have self-regulation. Self-regulation is when we are triggered by the things we've been through, it gets us dysregulated, it impacts our behavior, it ignites anxiety, panic attacks, all these different things, aggressive behavior, passive aggressive behavior. But what we need outside of relationships is opportunities how to get regulated. Sometimes that's through meditation and mindfulness. Sometimes that's through different types of therapy, from cognitive behavioral therapy, from EDMR therapy, from hypnotherapy. Sometimes writing in your journals can be a way of therapy to get you regulated. Relaxation, as well as meditation, being able to relax, getting the brain and the mind and the body to get to this place of calming. So there's all kinds of ways we can look at with healing. Also, relationships far as with different organizations and different societies, support groups and mentoring groups can be a great place. Restorative practices or restorative approaches. Sometimes when people are dealing with their trauma, it impacts their behavior so bad to where it puts them into bad situations where they make bad choices. They may end up in juvenile detention centers. They may end up in the county jail. They may end up in state or federal prison. And so what we need to do with people that have a lot of trauma in their lives, that we look to help them, not so much from a punitive standpoint, but more to a restorative standpoint. Resources, which means that sometimes people need to wrap around the services. They may need a therapist, they may need a mentor, they may need to go do some yoga, they may need to have a practitioner in mindfulness, they may need a pastor for prayer, and go to church, they may need to go have a rabbi to help them in the synagogue. I mean, there's all kinds of different ways to help individuals deal with their issues of trauma by having resources. But then resilience, and I like what Dr. Dawson said, it's the bounce back. I actually say Dr. Holt says resilience, in my words, is being able to bounce back from setbacks. And you can rebound, okay? And one of the big things that we have to look at, we must take care of ourselves. You are the best gift. If you don't take care of yourself, you're no good for nobody else. You cannot help your kids. You can't help nobody in your career. You can't help your business. You can't help many people in your community if you don't take care of yourself. You cannot pour from an empty cup. So please make sure that you're taking care of yourself. When we look at self-care, do your tank look like this? Do your tank look like this? Or do your tank look like this? Oh my God, do your tank look like this? You're totally empty. What we need to be doing is making sure that our tank look like this. So make sure that you pour into yourself. The more you are healed, the more you are whole, the more that you are able to help other people. Listen, there is hope. And I'll get to my last one for the sake of time. Look at 8 dimensions when we talk about taking care of ourselves. Taking care of yourselves is physical, is occupational, is mental, is environmental, is social, is intellectual, is financial, and it's also spiritual. So when we talk about your wellness, we're talking about 8 dimensions, ladies and gentlemen. Your physical, putting the right food in your life. Spiritual, being self-aware, self-value, self-esteem, or church, or prayer, or meditation, or going to Bible study, going to revival. Sometimes we need that. Financial wellness, making sure that we stay out of debt and we create more streams of income, because there's no stress like money stress, okay? Intellectual, environmental, social, think about those things. Mental, take the stigma off of mental health. If you need the mental health support, get the mental health you need, okay? And hope, I close out on hope, is that gives us that helps us rise above our realities. Right now, our current realities may be really tough, but you can rise above it when you have hope. Hope gives you the foresight and the insight that things will get better than where you are right now. So in my closing is that, are you a thermometer or are you a thermostat? The thermometer is a gadget that can only tell you what's wrong, but it doesn't have the power to change what's wrong. It can only tell you it's 60 degrees, but it cannot make you warmer to be 75. But you can have hope to think about being a thermostat, which is, if the room is 32, if the room is 42, if the room is 55, and you need it to be at 75 degrees, the thermostat has the power to shift the culture, shift the climate, shift the environment to be what it needs to be. But then guess what? The last thing about the thermostat is, not only does it have the power to change the environment, it has the power to maintain the environment. So I ask all of us a self-reflecting, soul-searching question: are you a thermometer or are you a thermostat? And it is my prayer, my hope, that you become thermostats to change your surrounding, change your environment, and maintain positive energy and positive healing in your life. This is Dr. Holt. I thank you for your time. I'm out of time. This has been fun. Let's all heal together. Take care.
Dr. Hope, that was so powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. As I share my screen, I am going to get on here so that we can finish this conversation up and finish this training. Again, that was powerful. Thank you so very much. I am Dr. Carlian Dawson. I am the Director of Education for the Arizona Center for African American Resources. ASCAR is like a think tank that we ensure that African American families are remembered at the table where the decisions are being made when we're invited to it. Okay, we've got to be at that table. So we look at that, and not only are we looking at just in general, but we're looking at the ability and disabilities of our families. I am a retired principal out of Rockford, Illinois. Once we did leave Illinois, I went on to Connecticut, and I was the director of diversity at UConn University in stores. And I know it is cold back there right now. But most important to me is I started looking at trauma because I knew as a principal that there was something wrong. When people talk about children, they were talking about them as if they were these aliens out there. And when I say aliens, I mean interterrestrial aliens that nobody knew how to handle and nobody knew how to talk to. And I knew that when I talked with them and the children would calm down and I would talk about things and build a relationship that Dr. Holt so eloquently talked about, it made a difference. And it was these relationships that catapulted me to start thinking about, what is it? What's going on? And a few years ago, I was honored with the ability to be in a 3-year program with none other than the Dr. Bruce Perry. I was so excited. I said I'd never get involved in a training program long like that again after I got my doctorate, but there I was, 3 years, and there I was in this program with him. So you think about, and I just love it because I'm so glad I did, because it gave a name to everything that I was experiencing and are talking about. You think about all the things that Dr. Holt shared with you, everything he shared with you, take that information and put disabilities on top of it.
Dr. Dawson,
Yes.
could you switch your view from
Oh,
the
thank
slide
you
deck prep?
so much.
No problem.
Thank you.
you.
I appreciate your calling that to my attention. So you think about all that they talk about and all he talked about, and you take that and you put disabilities on top of it, okay? And when you think about that, all of what that does is that it allows us to look and see how we are being impacted across the board, okay? So what is resilience? Dr. Holt talked about what I said resilience was. Let me fix this. That when I look at the American Psychology Association, what they said is this, and I want you to listen carefully to this. I'm going to read this to you. Resilience is the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or even significant sources of stress, such as family and relationship problems, serious health problems, or workplace and financial stressors. Didn't he talk about finances? It means, they say, bouncing back from difficult experiences. Now, what I say about this is, when I talk to people, I says, don't let nobody give you the beat down, all right? Now, look at these words, adapting. That means you've got to change, modify, alter something in the face of adversity, difficulties and misfortunes that happen. Where there is trauma, he talked about the deeply distressing or disturbing experiences that we sometimes have. In tragedy, okay, that's an event that's going to cause some great suffering or some destruction, okay? Threats. Now, threats is a statement of an intention to inflict pain or injury or damage to somebody, okay? And then it's even significant sources of stress. So when we got family issues, disabilities can be a family issue. When those things happen, okay? When we have relationship problems, when we can't talk to each other, when we have chronic health conditions that are brought on by all these issues, up to 90% of our health issues are brought on by stress. And the workplace and the financial stressors, all this. Now, and I ask you this, APA says we bounce back. I say, we can't bounce back. You know, how do we bounce back? Look at where we come from. Dr. Holt just talked about that. We don't bounce back. Our goal is to walk through. We have to keep walking through. We can't fall down. That's why we can't get the beat down. We've got to walk through. And so when you think about that, it makes you kind of like, remember Arsenio Hall, he used to say things that make you go, well, what do you think our ancestors went through? Dr. Holt talked to you about that. The trauma they went through, I call it the body stealing experience, because their bodies were literally stolen from their land. They think about the pain of not seeing their families, the pain of abuse that they experienced, the neglect that they received, the pain of not being able to speak or to be understood in their own language, okay? And heaven forbid, if they had something that was going on that made it worse, a disability, a seen or unseen disability, it made it even worse. So all of these things you think about, how did they make it? Well, this is, I contend to and suggest this. They had hope. Hope. What in the world is hope? They decided for themselves first that they were going to live. They decided, and this is where their resilience began. They had the tenacity, and that's with every fiber of their body, just to hold on. They had the audacity to be bold, to live, and they decided to live. Hope, when I think about it, is made up of these components. Believe that there's a reason to live. Without hope, what point is there? What good is it going to be? To believe that your future will be better. It's got to be. It can't be like this all the time. Believe that your children will have a better future than yourself. They've got to be. So I'm going to hold on. I'm going to hope. And they decided to hope. They were in those dimensions of wellness that Dr. Holt shared with you. And I'm going to share these with you because when you think about this, you think about it. This is not unlike even with the disability community. The same thing happens. The existence, in this dimensions of wellness, and this is just my version of, we have a bigger version of it, as you saw. But when you think about it, I believe it was their strong belief that brought them walking through what is called these 5 protective factors I'll be sharing with you later on. But first, they had to exist. Now, they had to be seen. They were not seen. How many times in the disabled community you're not seen for what's going on, for who you are? You're not seen. So your existence has to be validated. Okay? That was for us too. And then survival. They had to decide that they were going to survive, shift from being property to being considered a partial person. This survival is day-to-day living. Not sure where I might lay my head that night. Not sure if the light's gonna be on, but I've got to make it through. And then resilience. It's now, you see me now, but resilience, it's not a bounce back. I'm walking through this adversity and then still staying when I get to the end of it. It's making a conscious decision to not let this stuff beat me down. And then thrive. Well, thriving is taking care of my family. We got food, we have a place to live. We're going from paycheck to paycheck, but we're okay. We got ours, now you get yours. But that's not the end of it, because there's more to living than to thriving. And quite honestly, most of us on this call are 2 paychecks away from not thriving. So when you think about it, we want to be in a flourishing community where it's about more than me. It's about my community being well. It's about all of us doing well. So that's what the flourishing about. That's why that is so important. This is our dimensions of how we can get to a better place, a better state in life. And that self-care that Dr. Holt mentioned, yes, it's a conscious and purposeful engagement in ways that promote our own physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health. Yes, physically, you gotta eat, sleep, exercise. If you don't eat right, if you don't sleep enough, if you don't move your body enough, things happen to it. Okay? Mentally, intellect, our body craves knowledge. It craves information. And we've got to do something with it. What stimulates you? When you take care of your mental health, you're taking care of your soul. You've got to. And I so much admire the gymnast Simone Biles when she talked about protecting her mental health. When you don't understand that, you may think it's a cop-out. But no. Mental health, this thing is serious. social. So, who do you have as a close circle of friends? How did you develop and maintain those relationships, especially over these last 2 years? They talk about social distancing and social, making sure so, and I kept saying, no, 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 no. Social distancing is not the key. The key is physical distancing. We've got to socially figure out a way to stay together, stay connected, because that emotional healing comes from that. Okay? How do you sit and deal with uncomfortable emotions? However way you deal with them, just know somebody's watching you, and they will do more of what you do than what you say. So how do you come to deal with those uncomfortable emotions that you have? And then spiritual. Nurturing your spirit is critical. Wherever you are, however you do it, you got to nurture your spirit, okay? And that brings me to our protective factors. What is a protective factor? Now, these are from Strengthening Families, okay? I didn't make these up. I just have some different names for them. But protective factors, there are conditions, and that's a state of something that with regard to an appearance or quality or of something, of anything. And then you've got attributes. This is the quality or the feature regarding an inherent part of someone or something, okay? So you've got these conditions or attributes in us as individuals and in our families and communities that promote the health and well-being of our children and our families, okay? What I call this is, we are family. We are family. I got all my brothers and sisters with me. We take care of each other. I listened to my husband talk about his daddy when he said that his daddy had to become subservient to his employers in order to continue to feed his family. He couldn't let them see the power he had in him. He had to become, and he was a big man, but he had to become less just so he could continue to feed his family. And his son was watching him. But we are family. We do what we need to do to take care of family. We do what we need to do. Strengthening families, protective factor 1. Now you got the definition of it. Here we call this parental resilience. And this parental resilience is the ability to recover. This is how we get out of trauma now, is the ability to recover from difficult life experiences that are sometimes strengthened by and even transformed by those experiences. Knowing how to manage stress in healthy ways. How do we manage stress? There are so many ways that we have to understand how to handle that. Disabled people have that same, how do they manage this? How do the parents get them through this? I call this straighten up and fly right, okay? Because once you understand what's going on, you can get through it. But we have to make sure that we understand and know and manage those around us. Every day, day in and day out, we've got to manage people around us and make sure that whatever they're doing is not impacting us. The social connections. This right here is positive relationships that provide emotional, informational, instrumental, and spiritual support. Now, I call this, I need you, you need me. We're all a part of God's body. Some of you will know where that's come from. I won't hurt you with words from my mouth, okay? You got that, right? But I'll tell you this, social connections is so strong that in order for us to feel like we belonged, we had to establish our own. HBCUs were established, historically Black colleges and universities, they were established. Social organizations were established, like the Links, the Jack and Jill of America, all of those things. The Divine Nine Greek organizations, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, and others were established, okay? That was important because we had to have those social connections. we had to be important somewhere. And so when we understood this, we did it in our churches and places of faith. That we had Sunday schools, and they had Sunday school superintendents. We had usher boards, deacon boards, choir. You know, it was the intellectual support and the social connection that we needed in order to do something, to be important someplace. Because if we weren't important on the job, because the best job we could have gotten, we got was cleaning somebody's house or cleaning an office floor or cleaning somebody's baby. But here we were somebody, and everybody could be a part of that. Everybody. Knowledge of parenting and child development. That's another one. I call, you know, when you think about that, that's understanding child development and parenting strategies that support physical, cognitive, language, social, and emotional development. So what kind of parent do you want to be? Or what kind of parent are you? Where did you get your parenting skills from? Okay. And I know that most of us got those parenting skills from the person that raised us. What I call this one is Big Mama Said. And I say this because a colleague of mine shared with me. I think she said, well, her grandson called her and told her, came to her house and brought her his sick child. And this man passed hospitals, urgent care centers, all these places, and brought that baby to the grandmother and shared that the baby was sick. And the grandmother says, why you take him to the hospital? He said, but I trust you and you know. See, we've got to have some knowledge, and we have to understand when things happen. And we are, because we're a close community, what Big Mama them said is so important to us. And they told us stuff. Through their experiences, they learned. And so aunties and uncles, they all help. And that's why even, you know, this knowledge of parenting and child development, Dr. Perry talks about all the time how way back when we were in our original places in Africa and everybody's, and when they were agriculture, I mean, when early in the American society, there were more people to children than there were children to people. I mean, sorry, there were more children, I get this right. There were more adults to children than there was children to adults. Excuse me about that. But our expectation, you think about that, is that our children, expectations of our children have to be appropriate. We have to know what they can and cannot do. There should be no teacher out there, no teacher that should tell you more about your child than what you know about that child. You need to know about child development. And so when you're asked to be in a parenting class, when you're asked to do these things, do it. If you see something going on, do it. It only adds information and power to you as a parent and raising that child. Then you'll know you can't expect a 2-year-old to behave like a 3-year-old or even a 5-year-old. Can't do that. But without that, we tend to think that can happen. And this is another place when we talk about language development. Reading to our children 20 minutes a day is powerful. It gives them vocabulary. It gives them words where they can express how they feel and not hit because of what they feel, okay? But children need to hear, get this, 30 million words before they are 3 years old. Not 30 years old, but 3 years old, okay? They need to hear that. Just be ready for kindergarten. That's true, that's true, all right? And then this concrete support in times of need. You know, is access to concrete support and services that address a family's needs and minimizes stress by challenges. I tell you this, don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it, okay? Don't be afraid. Don't be too proud to ask for help when you need it. That fear and that pride can put you in the grave. How many of you today grew up on government support? You know, commodities, food stamps, Section 8 housing. But look at you today, okay? Without that, you might not be here. How many of you, when thought about, you're afraid to tell people? I tell people all the time, I grew up in the original square mile of Surprise, Arizona, the original square mile. Poverty still exists there. I grew up there. Where you grow up is not your destiny. Where you are is not your destiny. You've got a greater place, a larger calling on your life. So don't be afraid to talk about, because somebody may see you and can know, and you can tell them, I asked for help when I needed it, okay? And you can. And this, I say to this one, a closed mouth gets nothing, but an open mouth gets fed. Open your mouth, right? That's what you want to do. Open your mouth. Protective factor number 5, support and emotional competence of children. Family and children's interactions that help the child develop, or the children develop, to the ability to communicate clearly, recognize and regulate their emotions, and establish and maintain relationships. You may be, our kids are told lots of stuff about themselves. They're told how smart they are. They're told how pretty they are. They're told, they're told all kinds of stuff. Don't believe the hype. Don't believe the hype. Don't make your children, don't tell your children to believe all that, okay? They may be pretty. Yeah, and that's fine. They may be smart, but don't you continue to tell them that without qualifying it. Because if you qualify it, then you give them reasons to continue on. But if you don't qualify it, if you say, baby, you pretty, baby, you smart, you smart. When I was at the University of Connecticut, I saw this happening all the time. When kids would come in and I'm gonna go into medicine. And then they flunk their first test and they get out of it and go do something else. Failure is part of success. So we need to make sure we help our children understand that when somebody says that you are smart, understand what it took to get you there. And you tell them thank you. And so when they say smart, I always correct it when I'm around my grandchildren, because now I know this. But when people say, oh yeah, she's smart, I'll say, yeah, she's smart because she studies every night. She does her homework. She gets it done on time. She does it neatly. She reads her books. That's what makes her smart. Oh, and they say, oh, she's such a beautiful girl. Yes, she is beautiful. Yes, he is a handsome young man. They brush their teeth every day. They comb their hair. They take a bath. Those are reasons to be beautiful. So you need to add something to that. And then even more important than trying to teach your children how to read, more important than trying to teach your children how to count. Because I had that all the time with families coming to me talking about they wanted me to get their kindergartners in early. That's a mistake. I always believed. Now, this is a Carlianism. I believe it was a mistake because the older you are, the better you can handle things. So, and I know my birthday in March caused me to get to school, start to school later than most of my peers. So I always, I always thought when I got to school, I was so smart. But what happened was I was older. I understood things better. I could understand things. And it made me smart. So of course I had to do my homework. I had to do all of that good stuff. But our brains are for child development. There are stages that we go through in order to understand and to get concepts. And we need to do that. We need to make sure and not stop trying to push our kids into school early because you want some rest, or you want some time off. And then the other thing is we want to make sure we teach our children how to regulate. When we teach our children how to regulate their emotions, when we teach our children how to put words to how they feel, they go farther. Okay, they go farther. And that's important because regulation helps them control their emotions, and they got words to it. So reading books like The Way I Feel to children 0 to 5, and you reading them and it tells you, I feel frustrated. I feel, and it's giving you pictures. I feel happy. I feel, and then asking them how, you know, how they feel. When you give them the words, they can tell you how they feel. A friend of mine talked about her grandbaby after she was reading that book to her. Her 2-year-old grandbaby told her, Gammy, I'm frustrated, because she had words. If she didn't have words, she might have just started crying and hitting. And that's one of the biggest reasons I found children to be in trouble in school, in elementary school, was that they did not have the words to go with how they were feeling. Give the babies words. Help them to be able to understand what they're going on so they can relate. In that that is that relationship building. That relationship building is when you are connected to someone, then you can correct them. If you're not connected, what do the kids tell you? You don't know me. You ain't my mama. You can't tell me what to do. But if there is a relationship, if there's a connection, you can talk with them and they will listen. I found the best way for me to get to my students was to connect with them and connect with their families. I was not afraid to make home visits. I was not afraid, and that was as a teacher and as a principal. I went to homes when the children did well. When the children were doing well, I went to their homes. I wanted their families to know how well they were doing. I don't care if they pick up a piece of paper and there were hellions all day, but they pick up a little piece of paper. I wanted their parents to know how they helped me out that day by picking up paper off the school ground and put it in the trash can. I wanted them to know that it makes a difference. And when I had children who were disabled in my school, I didn't go around, you know, as a matter of fact, when I was teaching, when I first started teaching, and I'm not going to give it a year because y'all, I'm going to date myself. But when I first started teaching, there was this inclusion concept going on where they wanted to include disabled children in the classroom and kind of let them acclimate and get used and kind of work with it, you know. And we had they be pulled out for whatever the needs were. Several kids got pulled out for that. But what that did was that taught me that children who sit in a wheelchair, they want to learn. They want to have friends around them. I learned that as a young teacher, and I carried that on through even today. It's important to make sure that we are an inclusive society where we are including all of the children. Have a relationship, okay? And then response. How do they respond? Well, if you have if they're regulated, if they have a relationship, they have more access to that higher order, that higher part, that prefrontal cortex of their brain, where that thinking goes on, where all the decisions are made. They have better access to that, and they can process information, and they can respond. Without that, they can't. So what do I call this? It takes a village to raise a child. It takes all of us to raise a child. Yes, yes. And then the last one, this is not a protective factor. The U.S. Government of Human Services added this one on to those protective factors and made it a 6th one, and it's nurturing and attachment. So when parents and children have a strong, warm feelings for one another, children develop trust that their parents will provide for them. What they need to thrive, they'll provide that, including love, acceptance, and some guidance and protection. They will flourish. They will, that's what they need. That's all they need, is that nurturing and attachment. When you when you take care of something, when you are a part of something, you will fight for that. But that could be the school you went to, and they said they're going to tear it down. Well, if you are active in that school, you will come out and stand up for that school. How much less will you come and stand up for your family when you are attached to them? So we want to make sure that we are nurturing and attaching to our families. And the more time we spend with them, I don't care if we ain't got but 50 cents. 50 cents. Take that 50, just get some Kool-Aid, do so, but go and be in the park. You don't have to spend money to nurture and attach to your children. It doesn't take money. All it takes is your time. Your time. That's all it takes. And a child's early experiences of being nurtured and developing a bond with a caring adult affects all aspects of behavior and development in their lives. And research shows that babies who receive affection and nurturing from their parents have the best chance of having a healthy development. A child relationship with a consistent, caring adult in the early years is associated later in life with, get this, better academic grades, healthier behaviors, more positive peer interactions, and an increased ability to cope with stress. What you say? I'm telling you, this helps. This makes a difference. And what do I call this? Just love on them anyway. Just love on them. That's all we got to do is love on them. Okay. So in closing, I'm going to just go down here because I'm repeating myself. I want y'all to know I repeat myself because I think it's important. But this is how I want to close out. What makes your family strong? And you'll get all these slides later on. You'll have all these slides from Dr. Holt and myself. But what makes your family strong? Well, look at this. Parental resilience. That inner strength you have that causes you to walk through and push through. Social connections. Connecting with someone inside or outside your family. Build a support system. That knowledge of parenting and child development. Learn to be your child's expert. Okay? Be your child's expert. Concrete support in times of need. Ask for help. Open your mouth. Ask for help when you need it. Social and emotional competence of children. They need words to express themselves. Give them words. Read to them. Talk with them. And not the directive talk. Ask them open-ended questions. What would you like to eat? If you ain't got but a hot dog and a pretzel stick, ask them, what is it they want to eat? Which one would they like to have? And let them decide. Help them to make decisions and not you be the deciding factor for them all the time. Give them a chance, okay? And then that nurturing. Develop that trust that's needed. Talk with them because when they trust you, guess what? They're going to trust somebody else. They'll trust their teachers. They'll trust and they'll grow up to be more thriving. Thank you all for attending this. Thank you for your attention. Dr. Holt and I really appreciate it. You guys, if there's some questions, we can go back and try to answer them now. But I thank you. Here's my contact information. If anybody needs to get in touch with me for anything, it's right here. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Dr. Holt and Dr. Dawson, for your fantastic presentation. We've had a really active chat, and it's just outstanding, outstanding. Thank you so much. John, did you find, there's so much going on in this, were there a few questions that I know you were monitoring, so I will let you take that.
Yes, it's a question I feel like everybody wants to know. And Lashaw Legal asked earlier, congratulations on the book, but where will this book be sold?
Well, we don't know yet. It's going to be sold everywhere, I'm sure. We're going to be Dr. Holt. We're going to have this book everywhere because we see right now when we talk to people about this book, what the interest is like. So Amazon, bookstores, we're looking at all those places.
Thank you. So stay tuned, everyone. We'll or search for it when you get a chance. Earlier on, I don't have the name of who asked, but it was during Dr. Holt's presentation. Someone asked about climate trauma, and the following comment was, "I feel like a lot of younger people, millennial and Gen Z, feeling very despondent about the lack of response to climate change, feeling like the world is going to end. We won't be able to raise kids. It's just going to be disasters, and it's overwhelming." So this individual is asking about any content on climate trauma.
No, that's kind of like way ahead of me. But I certainly can start looking at that type of research in regards to that because people's stress is real, and they're seeing our world being turned upside down, and the powers that be not taking global warming and things of that nature not serious. And so I can imagine there is a level of stress of what will the world look like, 20, 30, or 50 years from now, and even will our landscapes remain the same with much of our ice from the north melting, and regions of our country that is below sea level, will our landscaping look different? Will California be here in 100 years? So yeah, most definitely, I totally get it. But just stay tuned. I will be working on that.
Thank you. And somebody had asked about the availability of the book and also the contact information on that last slide. So I put that in the chat, but do you all have any information on when the book would be available?
So we're trying to get it done by the fall of this year, 2022, get it to the publisher, and hopefully we were talking about perhaps a big book release for Black trauma will be probably next year in February for Black history as a kickoff month.
Thank you. And I believe that's all I've tracked that the questions weren't answered in the chat. So if the participants want to add more questions at the bottom, we'll read them out. Oh, we got one.
I was going to say we have two. The first one from Sean Cooney. Go ahead, Sean. I'm sorry.
Okay, no worries. Sean Cooney states, social connections in school. Should teachers acknowledge and maybe explain a child's disability in front of peers with the child and family's permission? I think a lot of children want to be friends, but it's a new situation for them that they don't know how to approach. So they resort to not talking to them at all. To what extent should parents and teachers be involved?
You know what? That's such a good question. And what I always did was, would the parent would be with us, and the child would be there, and in the classroom, and we'd all have a conversation about what's going on, why this child was in a wheelchair, or why this child used a machine to talk with. But we did that so that we don't know all the answers as the educators, but the parents are there. And so it was wonderful having a parent there to be able to explain and talk and make this child another child. And so that was very helpful. And I like when they do, I like doing that than making it secret and talking behind, in a different location, and then bringing somebody in and think they're going to blend right in. They don't blend in like that.
Thank you. And I might not say it correctly, but Tasha C asks, can you briefly explain epigenetics again?
Is that me or?
I believe it was during your presentation.
Oh, yeah. So the science of epigenetics is pretty much looking at how genes and DNA is impacted by exterior sources. And so we do know that there is a direct link of trauma, especially when it's generational, because it's so ongoing that no one is breaking the vicious cycle of the trauma. And so what we're seeing is when trauma is constantly impeding in the individual's life, it begins to impact their actual DNA makeup and genetics. And so this is what we were talking about. What grandmama experienced, should the granddaughter be experienced? Absolutely not. But the fact of the matter is when we allow trauma not to be reversed, reduced or disrupted and dismantled, it goes into the next generation. And so it also impacts our DNA. This is also a reason why, if you notice, a lot of people of color, African Americans in particular, are also sharing the same chronic diseases as well, because we began to see what grandmother went through, grandfather went through. The third generation sometimes is going through the same thing, depression the same way, anxiety the same way. And so it begins to deal with DNA and genetic expression. And so this is why trauma must be addressed as early as possible to improve the mental and the medical and the physical health outcomes of individuals. The quicker we can address it, the better that the third generation will have broader trajectories to be successful.
And if I can add to that, that the trauma that happens, or the whatever's going on that's being generational, it can happen at an earlier age on those succeeding generations, because that original generation, their outlook was they were moving and exercising, you know, they were working sometimes to death, but they still worked it out. While now it's not that much exercise, not that much, the sleep even is different. Then they got that when it was dark, they went to sleep. And it was light, they got up. Now, because of computers and technology, we stay up all night long. The phones are constantly going off. So all these things, the gene expression is happening earlier when it comes to this negative DNA that's being expressed in our bodies.
Thank you. We have a couple more questions. I just want to remind everyone, please fill out the survey, and especially if you want the certificate of attendance, go to that link that I just put up there. Earlier, Silva asked, how can parents address trauma as being part of a minority group and the feelings of social inequality around them? How do we start the conversation?
That's a good question. I think in the Black family and in the Black congregations and in the Black community, number one, we have to remove the stigma of mental health. And we have misconstrued sometimes being strong when we are falling apart was a sign of strength, and ignoring a lot of the psychological and psychiatric and social situations and ramifications, and ignoring it and to appear to be strong really was killing us. So one of the first things we have to do is remove the stigma of mental health. And when we think of mental health, we think of the extremes, like straitjackets, electrical shock therapy, crisis centers, asylums. Like, you're not putting me in no asylum, right? And that's not necessarily have to be that extreme. You know, it may not be schizophrenia, but you might be suffering from some type of mild or moderate depression. And we have to have those conversations. So one, remove the stigma. Two, I'll tell you another thing, especially in the Black family. I could tell you another thing that kills us is family secrets. If you want to know why a lot of people are having suicidality and depression and anxiety, is because of those secrets that you told that 7-year-old that was inappropriately touching her at a young age to be quiet about it. And then we wonder why we have these exacerbated mental health conditions. So that's an issue. Then thirdly, we have to be careful of that, because if you don't talk about what's happening to you and you hold any secrets, what we do is we put victims in the same space as the perpetrator on Thanksgiving, on Christmas, and during the holidays, and we re-trigger these things, right? So we have to have conversations. We have to create a platform where kids can be kids and talk about what's going on. This is the reason why myself, I don't let my kids spend the night over everybody's house. I don't care who they are, because there's too much stuff going on. So we want to always have that line of communication where kids can talk and parents can talk. And let me tell you something, parents, when your kids tell you something that's going on, believe them.
Amen. Period. Exclamation point. Believe them.
Might have touched on this a little bit, but Jacqueline asks, can we heal from generational DNA trauma?
Yes,
Absolutely.
yes, you can.
Absolutely.
I let Dr. Dawson, I don't want to, I come behind you.
That is so true. We can, but it really is going to take something different getting us out of trauma than what got us in there. You can't hang on to the same thing. And so, yes, you can heal from generational trauma, but it's going to take a concerted effort. We've got to, as I was sharing with you, you got to speak up and talk about it. You got to get it out. You know, I always tell people there's more room outside than there is inside. So you've got to get the info, get it out so you can express and talk about what's going on in your life. Generational trauma is, you know, when you, as Dr. Holt talked about, you know, when these things happen to us, just because mom and them did this and got sick, I don't have to continue on with this. If I know that eating all this stuff and gaining all this weight is going to get me diabetes and then get me high blood pressure, okay, should I keep doing it? I need to do something different with it. And I need to make a conscious effort to do something different. So it's important that, you know, we are our parents' children, but we're not their history. We're not what happened to them. No.
Yes, and let me throw in something that's one of my powerful statements that will also be in the book of Black Trauma. I'm going to keep promoting it right now.
It is.
Is I always say that trauma may be your history, but it doesn't have to be your destiny. And so when it relates to generational trauma, most definitely it's very historical. I mean, Black people's trauma is different from anybody's trauma on the planet, and you can't get me to think anything different. But what we don't talk enough about is Black folks may not have had the biggest houses and the most luxurious cars, but let me tell you where we're rich and wealthy at, and that's in resilience. We can take some lickings and keep on ticking. There's something about us on how we have the power of resilience. And so, yes, you can reverse it, but you have to do the work. You have to take the accountability of your generation so you can make sure that the future generation have a broader future. But, you know, getting our brain from being on high alert and addressing our mental and emotional issues. And I like what Dr. Dawson said, which we forget. We also got to be careful what we're putting in our bodies, because we actually have two brains, and I don't have time to deal with the top brain. And then your second brain is your digestive system. So your digestive system is not just full of small and large intestines, it's also full of neurotransmitters like your brain and your skull.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Thank you. And we're going to need about a minute at the end to close it out. But I want to read one comment. Tanisha says, Dr. Holt, you're killing me with a trailer about this book here. So, but going up in the comments, I'm not going to read the whole comment. I'm just going to read the question getting there. There's a personal anecdote that follows. But Skylar asks, how do we ensure that children who have issues in school that might be disabled get resources?
You know, I'll start with that one. You know, in the school district, there is information that every parent should have when their children is there for, and they have special needs. Get that information and use it. Read it, understand it. Normally it's a little booklet, but you need to read and understand what rights your child have in school. And when they are disabled, there is laws that are in place that must be followed for them. And so you want to make sure you do that and stay on it, because the teachers all mean well. I mean, they come in, they do their best, but again, they're doing their best. It is you as the parent who's responsible to make sure that your child gets their needs met. You just can't believe that it's going to happen. You've got to check and know Be at those meetings, okay? Get at those meetings and understand what they're saying they're going to do, how they're going to do it, and when they're going to do it. Okay, that's critical.
Thank you. I am going to again put in the chat. In order to get your certificate of attendance, please fill out a survey at that link. And also these recordings will be available on the African American Conference on Disabilities Facebook page. So please forward freely, and I'll hand this off to Natalie. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And again, thank you to Dr. Dawson and Dr. Holt for their amazing presentation today. Dr. Dawson joined us last year and she was just equally as amazing. So thank you so much. Just wanted to
Thank
say
you very
thank
much,
you.
Natalie.
You're welcome. Thank you for joining us again. Wanted to say thank you to our sponsors. They are here right behind me. Without their support, we could not make this conference possible. As John said, we appreciate your feedback on to improving our efforts. We've got our survey. He's got the link in the chat. Please take our survey, let us know how we're doing, and to also get your certificate of attendance. Recordings will be on Facebook. And I'd like to thank our interpreters, Sydney, Crystal, and our captioner, Kimberly, for doing awesome work as usual for today's conference. Our next session will be on February 8th at 9 a.m. And that session will be with Wendy Parent-Johnson from the Sonoran USET at the University of Arizona and Janice Burnett, Assistive Technology Professional at the Collaborative Technology Solutions, talking about assistive technology and employment opportunities. And I see Reynaldo's hand up.
Yes,
So
Natalie.
Mr.
Hi,
Fowler,
hi.
I will let you end today's session.
Thank you, Natalie. Hi, I'm Ronaldo Fowler. I'm the co-founder of the African American Conference on Disabilities. This has been a really great week for us. I just want to extend a very thank you to Dr. Dawson and Dr. Holt. I also would like to invite them to our conference next year in February. Maybe they have a book signing and a book reading at the conference next year. So this has been a marvelous week for us. As Natalie mentioned, please join us on Tuesday. Please share the link. This is just the beginning, the first week of the conference. We're going to be here until February 17th. This is our 11th year of the African American Conference on Disabilities. So we're going to be closing it out. Please complete your surveys. That's very important for us. And we look forward to seeing you next Tuesday for the African American Conference. John, is there anything else we need to add? Natalie, anything else?
I think that's it. We'll leave the room open a little bit so someone can scroll up and down the chat. I do see that a lot of people are asking for the Two Brains presentation. So if you...
That's something we're going to have to include. We're going to have to include that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the information will be available on our website following the conference. The recordings are available now on Facebook. So thank you and see you next Tuesday. Have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.
Sure.